Because of the pandemic, families and school systems were faced earlier this year with abrupt changes in learning and scheduling. With the start of a new school year, more changes are on the way, along with some new decisions. To guide us through some of the local options is our guest from SchoolFacts Boston, a member of its Family Advisory Board, Vernée Wilkinson. Thank you very much for being with us, Vernée.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Vernée, I'm sure most parents know what's coming soon, and they're probably getting some kind of communication either from a school or a school system. But other than maybe responding to that, what else should they be doing right now?
I think parents definitely need to be staying aware of updates that are coming and having a general sense of the communication that's being sent either from their school system and or their individual school. But also being aware, not necessarily to kind of like lock into that messaging, either logistically or mentally or operationally, because as we see, things continue to change pretty rapidly. At this point, it feels like things are changing every 2 weeks to 4 weeks. So staying tuned in and being prepared for whatever the final results will be.
What about assessing the health risk of children? Because even if schools had uniform amounts of building safety, you look at the map of the neighborhoods and the data just from the city of Boston, you see these vastly different levels of infection rates. I mean, how should parents be processing that?
It's a lot to process. Unfortunately, it falls along the lines of patterns that are far too common. A lot of the communities where we're seeing the highest rates of infection are also communities where we see highest rates of poverty, are also communities where we see more issues around the education and opportunity gap. So COVID is highlighting and underlining and underscoring many challenges for many communities and in many ways specifically for Black and Brown communities.
And what about parents who just might have mixed feelings? On the one hand, you can be distrustful of conditions in the school building, but on the other hand, you could be disappointed with remote learning as you've known it so far. You're afraid of giving up on the opportunity of in-person learning. So how should parents balance those things?
I think a lot of parents are taking this moment to reevaluate. So with remote learning in the spring, a lot of parents had a glimpse into their child's classroom, a front row seat in ways that they haven't really had in the past. So that gave parents a lot of opportunity for evaluation for better or worse. Some schools were doing remote learning really well, and some schools, and it seems like a vast majority, there's a lot left to be desired. So it continues to speak to the fact that parents have known for a while and continue to see and recognize that they deserve better, and students deserve better. Boston families deserve better schooling, and having a front row seat to your child's experience by way of remote learning gives you some evidence that you might not have had in other cases. But many of these issues and concerns are compounding issues from pre-COVID, and in many ways, years prior, and in many cases, even generations prior.
Well, I know even though Boston schools are opening all remote, it might be just a little beyond that when students do start going back to classrooms. And it's going to be a new world. There are going to be a lot of things those students are not going to be able to do that were totally normal before. How should parents prepare them for that?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of talk and conversation around kind of making up for the educational loss, the time that's been lost in the classroom. How can students, I guess the term I'm hearing a lot is catch up. But it's kind of hard for me to understand exactly what catch up means, because it's like catch up to who if everybody's in a similar place and situation. So a lot of attention is being given to that. But as a mother and our household as parents, there's a lot that you see just on a day-to-day basis, recognizing that our children aren't as engaged, and as a result, and sometimes they're not as engaging, they don't quite feel themselves. So they're missing out on the engagement of their peers, which is something they'll never be able to catch up on, no matter how great remote learning is. Just being able to sit down and play with a friend or talk to a friend on a one-on-one or small group setting, or even just like many kids are missing birthday parties. They miss a birthday party in the spring, and some of them are still talking about that now, because those are big milestones for them. So parents and families are being creative and resourceful, but I think it's also important just to find ways to have conversations to talk about the things that are being lost, and things that unfortunately might not be the same again, or moments and milestones missed that can't be regained.
Of course, what's also happening is that we have lived through this period where maybe they haven't gotten worse, but they're certainly much more noticeable, whether because of the pandemic, police use of force, protests. Kids are absorbing some of that. So what does that mean when they go back to school now?
Yeah, kids are definitely absorbing some of that, whether it's directly or indirectly by way of their parents' trauma or anxiety, or however that might be manifesting in the household. So as kids go back to school, I'm not really sure exactly what that kind of looks like per se, except for the fact that I'm really hopeful and in many ways desperate for school communities and school leaders to see racial justice as a safety issue. So as they're addressing COVID and all the policies and procedures, that they're also being very mindful and intentional about having culturally competent curriculum, making sure that their school setting and leadership and teachers are safe spaces, on creating and building safe spaces for all students, and for students of color and students of historically marginalized people groups, and really doing the work to normalize conversations around justice, because some of these conversations are having at home, but not in all cases. So the school system is the only system that everybody goes through. So in many ways, it's one of the only places that racial justice can systemically be addressed head on.
So it sounds like here, what this means is that, and I think some teachers understand this already, but across the board, maybe they have to recognize that you have to acknowledge that the things are happening in the outside world, and that has to become part of, I guess, the conversation in school.
Yeah, in many ways, and it's not necessarily or exactly the outside world. If you see somebody on television who's no longer living, and either was harmed or lost their life by way of police brutality, I mean, that's very real, and there's no way to really continue to consider that the outside world. So I guess in many ways, thinking about what that conversation and culture shift looks like for educators.
Vernée, on your website for SchoolFacts Boston, you have information about not just the Boston public schools, but also charter schools, Catholic schools, and Metco. So can you tell us how people can find their way to that in case they need some more details about making their decisions?
Sure, of course. So schoolfactsboston.org, the best way to continue to stay connected is being signed up for our newsletter. We put out updates and reminders to share with parents and families so that they can stay informed about what is going on in the schools, and also have tools and tips for advocacy for themselves and for their school communities. And coming up in September 15th, we will be having a launch for a new campaign in this moment with so much going on for parents, students, and families. Parents and families really need to be coming together to find new solutions to make sure that their voice is heard and at the center of decision-making processes by school and community and city and state leaders. So we'll really be driving into the fall. Our back to school will be convening and reconvening parents and centering family voice.
I have just a little time here, but I know it's important. Please, a plug for the importance of being able to talk to other parents to get help.
Absolutely. When you go to your school with a concern that might be specifically about your child, you might be approaching it one way, and when you come out of that, you've learned what worked and what didn't work. But as parents work together more, they can learn from each other's experience, and sometimes they can overlap their areas of concern to amplify their voice towards positive change.
For taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much.
Vernée Wilkinson from SchoolFacts, Boston.